Tonight, we uncover a story buried beneath centuries of faith, a rivalry older than any religion, and a secret that may change everything we think we know about divine power. They say the walls of Rome hold every secret, but some are buried far deeper, in stone chambers where the air itself tastes of centuries, and the silence carries weight like a physical thing pressing against your chest. And tonight you're going to walk those corridors with me, past shelves that sag under the burden of knowledge, too dangerous for daylight, through passages where popes once whispered prayers that never made it into any official liturgy. And honestly, you probably won't survive this, at least not with your comfortable assumptions about history intact, which is exactly why, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world, because there's something beautifully strange about all of us scattered across time zones, yet gathered here in this shared darkness. And now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Beginning in the year 1119, when 9 French knights arrived in Jerusalem with a mission they claimed was about protecting pilgrims, though historians have debated for centuries whether that was ever their true purpose, or merely the most convenient lie ever told to a king. And you can almost smell the dust of that ancient road, as these armored men rode through gates that had seen empires rise and crumble, their horses' hooves echoing against stones that remembered Roman legions and Byzantine emperors, and King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, perhaps sensing opportunity, or perhaps genuinely grateful, offered these knights something extraordinary. He gave them headquarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built atop the ruins of what tradition held to be Solomon's Temple. And here's where mainstream history gets interesting, because we know for a fact that the Knights Templar spent the next 9 years excavating beneath that mosque. We have records of their digging, accounts of their secrecy, and what's genuinely documented is that they shipped mysterious crates back to Europe, heavy enough to require multiple pack horses, though what those crates contained remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. And you can picture it now, can't you? The way torchlight would have flickered across ancient stonework as these men descended into chambers that hadn't known human breath in a millennium, their fingers tracing Hebrew inscriptions carved when Jerusalem was still the beating heart of a kingdom long vanished. And here's a quirky detail that most people don't know. The Templars developed their own system of encrypted communication, involving a cipher that combined Latin, Greek, and what some scholars believe might have been elements of Arabic, or even older Phoenician symbols, creating messages so layered that modern cryptographers still find them fascinating. Though whether this was paranoia or protection of genuinely explosive information is of course part of the scholarly debate that continues to this day. And imagine the weight of secrecy these 9 men carried as they worked in darkness, the scrape of metal against stone, the occasional scatter of pebbles into unseen depths, and perhaps the growing realization that they had found something, really found something. Not gold or jewels, though those would have been nice, but knowledge, documents, artifacts that predated Christianity itself. And you have to wonder what goes through a devout knight's mind when he discovers evidence that contradicts everything the church has taught him, when faith collides with physical proof lying there in the dust, like a grenade with the pin already pulled. And back in Europe, the Catholic Church was consolidating power in ways that would have made any modern corporation jealous, standardizing doctrine, eliminating rival interpretations, building the institutional framework that would dominate Western civilization for the next 1,000 years. And into this carefully controlled environment came these knights with their mysterious cargo, and Pope Honorius II, demonstrating either remarkable vision or spectacular gullibility, depending on your interpretation of events, granted the Templars official recognition in 1129, making them answerable only to the Pope himself, exempt from local laws, taxes, and pretty much every form of oversight that might have revealed what they actually knew, which was either brilliant strategy or the medieval equivalent of giving nuclear codes to your weird cousin. And the Templars grew wealthy, absurdly wealthy, inventing early forms of banking, establishing a network of fortresses across Europe and the Holy Land, and all the while maintaining their inner circle of knowledge, passing secrets from grandmaster to grandmaster in ceremonies that mixed Christian ritual with something older, something that made bishops nervous even as they smiled and accepted Templar gold for church construction. And you can feel it, can't you? That tension between public piety and private knowledge, the way these warrior monks would kneel in prayer while knowing truths that would shatter the very foundations they appeared to worship. And here's where it gets deliciously ironic. The church that blessed the Templars also feared them, The same institution that granted them power also plotted their destruction, because power tolerates rivals only as long as they remain useful. And the Templars, with their wealth and secrets and loyalty structure that bypassed normal church hierarchy, had become dangerously independent, and in the Vatican archives, those climate-controlled chambers, where documents rest in acid-free folders and scholars work under supervision, more intense than nuclear facilities, there are reportedly files marked with seals that haven't been broken in 700 years, correspondence between popes and Templar Grand Masters, confessions extracted under circumstances the modern world would call torture, but medieval canonists called rigorous questioning, and accounts of what was found in those Jerusalem excavations, though no researcher has ever been granted access to verify these claims, which itself tells you something about how seriously Rome takes these particular secrets, and you have to admire the sheer audacity of it all, the Church simultaneously using the Templars as its military arm, while desperately trying to control what they knew, like employing a guard dog that might have learned your darkest secret, and the Templars understood this dance perfectly. They played their role as defenders of Christendom while quietly accumulating evidence that Christianity itself might be built on shakier ground than anyone wanted to admit. And imagine the conversations that must have occurred in Templar chapter houses, knights fresh from Jerusalem, describing what they'd found in those underground chambers. Older members debating what to do with knowledge that could destroy their world or remake it entirely, and all of this conducted in whispers, in codes, in rituals designed to preserve truths too dangerous for common speech. And the truly fascinating part is how successful they were at keeping secrets, because even now, even after their spectacular fall and centuries of investigation, we still don't know for certain what they found. We have theories, educated guesses, scholarly debates that generate more heat than light, but the actual truth remains locked away, either destroyed during the purge that was coming, or hidden so expertly that it might never surface. And as you lie here tonight, comfortable in your modern bed with your modern certainties, consider what it would mean if those secrets emerged tomorrow. If some construction crew in Rome or Jerusalem broke through a wall and found the Templar archive intact, documents that proved the knights had discovered something fundamental, something that would require rewriting, not just church history, but the entire narrative of Western civilization, and whether the Vatican would allow such information to see daylight, or whether those documents would disappear into the archive so quickly, you'd wonder if you'd imagined the whole thing. And the scholarly debate about what the Templars actually found has generated enough books to fill a library, with theories ranging from the Ark of the Covenant to ancient texts describing Jesus as a political revolutionary rather than divine, from genealogies that challenged apostolic succession to evidence of pre-Christian mystery cults that Christianity had absorbed and rebranded. And each theory has its passionate defenders and its sharp critics, but what nobody debates is that the Templars found something, dug it up, brought it home, and built an organization specifically designed to protect it. And that organization grew so powerful that eventually it threatened the very church that created it. Which brings us to the question of why King Philip IV of France decided to destroy them, and whether Pope Clement V went along reluctantly or enthusiastically, and what role the secrets played in that calculus. But that's a story for the next section. And for now, just breathe slowly and picture those 9 knights in the darkness beneath Jerusalem, their faces lit by torchlight, hands trembling slightly as they opened a sealed chamber for the first time in centuries and felt their world shift beneath their feet. You descend deeper now into the actual moment of discovery, because to understand what the Templars became, you need to imagine what they found. And yes, I know, imagining is all we can do since the actual artifacts have either vanished or sit in vaults we'll never access. But bear with me as we reconstruct this scene from fragments of evidence, scholarly inference, and the kind of historical detective work that makes archaeologists wake up sweating in the night. And you're standing in that chamber now, the air cool and dry in that particular way of underground spaces in arid climates, dust motes drifting through your torch beam like tiny satellites orbiting their own miniature suns. And the 9 knights, these men who'd left everything for a holy mission, are spreading out across a room that hasn't known human presence since before Muhammad walked the earth, since before the Roman legions marched through Jerusalem's streets, possibly since before the Second Temple fell. Here's a documented fact that sends shivers down spines. Archaeological surveys of the area beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque have confirmed the existence of extensive underground chambers, some dating to the First Temple period around 950 BCE, chambers large enough to hide significant artifacts and constructed with the kind of precision that suggests they were built to preserve something important. And the Templars had 9 years, 9 full years of unrestricted access to dig, explore, and excavate, which is an eternity when you're searching for something specific, and every indication suggests they knew exactly what they were looking for, which raises the question of who told them where to dig, what maps or traditions or documents guided their search, and there are whispers, unverified but persistent, of a French monk named Peter the Hermit, who'd visited Jerusalem decades earlier, and returned with stories of hidden chambers and sacred knowledge, stories he supposedly shared with certain noblemen who would later fund the Templar expedition. Though whether this was divine inspiration, historical research, or elaborate treasure hunting, remains part of that wonderful scholarly debate that keeps medieval historians employed, and you can see it, can't you? The moment when a knight's shovel hits something solid, not rock but worked stone, a deliberate construction, and the sudden electric silence as everyone stops digging and gathers around, torches converging on this one spot, hands carefully brushing away centuries of accumulated earth, and what emerges is a seal, intact, pressed into wax or clay, that somehow survived, bearing symbols that predate their entire religion. And here's where it gets wonderfully weird. Several medieval manuscripts refer to the Templars possessing what they called the bones of the son of Solomon, which sounds like religious relics, except that Solomon's son was Rehoboam, whose reign split the kingdom of Israel, and the Templars were oddly specific about this terminology, never claiming bones of Solomon himself or King David, but always the son of Solomon, and scholars have debated whether this was code for something else entirely, perhaps documents about succession and legitimacy that would undermine certain church claims, or actual remains that proved something uncomfortable about biblical genealogy. And the truth is, we simply don't know, which is either frustrating or delightful, depending on whether you prefer certainty or mystery. And personally, I find mysteries much more conducive to sleep than answers, because answers just generate more questions, whereas mysteries let your mind drift into comfortable speculation. And so you watch these knights carefully, opening sealed containers, unrolling scrolls that crack slightly after centuries of stillness, squinting at text in languages some of them recognize, and others that require expert translation back in Europe, and perhaps, just perhaps, finding objects that shouldn't exist according to official church chronology. Artifacts that suggest Jesus wasn't quite who the Nicene Creed claimed, or that early Christianity had absorbed more from competing mystery religions than anyone wanted to admit, and the mainstream historical record does document something fascinating. After the Templars returned from their excavations, they began incorporating unusual symbols into their architecture and seals, imagery that mixed Christian iconography with older Egyptian, Persian, and Hebraic elements, which either shows admirable interfaith appreciation or suggests they discovered connections between religions that the official narrative claimed were completely separate, and the church noticed. Oh, the church definitely noticed, but by then the Templars were too useful, too wealthy, too well connected to challenge directly, which must have been extraordinarily frustrating for popes who suspected heresy but couldn't prove it, without access to whatever the knights were hiding. And here's a quirky detail that most people miss. The Templars developed a reputation for being unusually educated for military men, establishing schools within their order where knights studied mathematics, astronomy, languages, and philosophy, subjects that were generally reserved for clerics, and they had the largest library in Paris at one point, filled with texts acquired from across their network of chapter houses. And when the order was finally suppressed, that library vanished so completely that it's become its own legend, with treasure hunters still searching for the famous Templar archive that supposedly contains knowledge from 3 continents and a dozen civilizations. And you have to wonder what they were reading in those texts, what they were learning that made them invest so heavily in education, and whether the knowledge from Jerusalem made them realize that understanding the context of their discovery required mastering languages and history most knights never bothered with. And back in that underground chamber, decisions are being made, because you can't just waltz into medieval Europe with evidence that contradicts church doctrine and expect a warm reception. So the knights are selecting carefully, taking what proves their theories but leaving enough behind to maintain deniability, wrapping precious items in cloth, packing them in crates with false bottoms and misleading labels, creating the medieval equivalent of an elaborate smuggling operation. And the sheer logistical challenge of moving heavy artifacts from Jerusalem to France without arousing suspicion must have been extraordinary, requiring coordination, bribery, misdirection, and probably a healthy dose of prayer to whichever deity was listening. And there's something darkly humorous about warrior monks sneaking contraband past church authorities, like teenagers hiding questionable materials from their parents. Except the stakes are eternal damnation instead of just grounding. And as the crates make their journey across the Mediterranean, through ports where customs officials can be convinced to look the other way. You have to picture the anxiety, the constant fear of discovery, the knowledge that if Rome learned what they'd found before the Templars established sufficient power and protection, the entire enterprise would collapse and probably result in burning at the stake, which tends to discourage open scholarly inquiry. And when the crates finally arrive in France, and the inner circle of knights opens them in secure chapter houses, surrounded by brothers sworn to absolute secrecy, the moment must have been extraordinary, vindication mixed with terror, because now they possess knowledge that could reshape civilization, and they're mortal men with limited time to figure out what to do with it. And the scholarly debate about whether the Templars intended to eventually reveal their discoveries or keep them perpetually secret has generated fascinating arguments, with some historians suggesting they were slowly preparing the ground for disclosure through education and architectural symbolism, while others argue they realized the knowledge was too dangerous and chose to become its eternal guardians. And both theories have merit, which is why the debate continues. And personally, I suspect the Templars themselves were divided on the question, some wanting to enlighten the world, and others recognizing that enlightenment often gets you killed, and so they compromise, preserving the knowledge, passing it through careful initiation rituals, maintaining secrecy, while also ensuring the truth wouldn't die with one generation. And this balancing act works surprisingly well for almost 2 centuries, the Templars becoming the most powerful military order in Christendom, their red crosses feared in battle, their banking system trusted across Europe, their chapter houses scattered from Scotland to Jerusalem, all while maintaining that inner core of secret knowledge. And it's actually impressive how long they kept it together, how they managed to be simultaneously orthodox enough to satisfy church authorities and heterodox enough to preserve truths that contradicted church teaching, walking that impossible tightrope generation after generation. And you have to respect the organizational discipline that required, the careful selection of initiates, the layered structure where outer members knew only the public mission, while inner circles gradually learned deeper truths, and all of it protected by oaths so severe that breaking them meant not just excommunication, but something worse, expulsion from the only community that understood what you knew, exile from the fellowship of shared dangerous knowledge. And as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine what it would be like to carry such secrets, to know truths that would destroy your world if revealed but that you couldn't unknow or ignore, and whether you'd have the strength to maintain silence, or whether eventually, exhausted by the weight of it all, you'd find some way to speak, and whether speaking would bring enlightenment or merely persecution, and whether in the end, the Templars made the right choice by hiding what they found, or whether humanity deserved the truth regardless of the consequences, questions without clear answers, which makes them perfect companions for the journey into dreams. You wake to October morning in 1307, except it's not really waking, more like surfacing from one nightmare into another, because you're a Templar knight and something feels wrong, the air tastes wrong, the silence is too complete, and then you hear boots in the corridor outside your cell, too many boots moving with purpose, and this is happening across France simultaneously, a coordinated strike of breathtaking scope and terrible efficiency, because King Philip IV has decided to destroy the entire order in a single day, and he's chosen Friday, October 13th, which will echo through superstition for the next 7 centuries. And here's an actual documented fact that never fails to shock. Philip managed to arrest essentially every Templar in France in a single sweep. We're talking about thousands of men seized simultaneously from scores of fortified chapter houses, which required planning so meticulous and secrecy so complete that it ranks among history's most successful military operations, and all the arrest warrants were dated the same day and carried identical charges: heresy, idol worship, and various other accusations that ranged from plausible to absolutely ridiculous. And you're being dragged from your bed now, still half in sleep, trying to process how royal soldiers are inside walls that should have been impregnable, how no warning reached you despite the Templars' legendary intelligence network, and the horrible dawning realization that this attack could only succeed if it was backed by the Pope himself, because Philip might be king, but the Templars answer only to Rome, except apparently not anymore. Apparently Pope Clement V has decided that maintaining good relations with France matters more than protecting an order he himself blessed, and the scholarly debate about whether Clement was a willing participant or a weak pope bullied by a strong king has raged for centuries, with evidence supporting both interpretations. And honestly, it probably doesn't matter to you right now, as soldiers are binding your wrists and inventorying your possessions, because either way, the result is the same: you're headed for interrogation, and your secrets are about to be extracted using methods that make modern enhanced interrogation look gentle by comparison. And here's something darkly fascinating that most histories gloss over. The Templars didn't resist, not militarily anyway. These were trained warriors who'd fought Saracens and survived crusades. They could have turned the arrests into bloodbaths, but they didn't. They submitted to arrest mostly peacefully, and historians debate whether this was Christian submission to authority or calculated strategy to protect the real secrets, because if they'd fought back, Philip would have justification to tear apart every chapter house, looking for contraband, but if they surrendered, maybe the most important hiding places would remain undiscovered, and there's evidence suggesting that the night before the arrests, certain senior Templars vanished, along with a significant portion of the Order's treasury, and presumably their most precious documents. 18 ships left La Rochelle harbor, and were never officially seen again, carrying who knows what to who knows where, and treasure hunters have been searching for those ships ever since, with theories placing them everywhere from Scotland to the Americas, because yes, some historians seriously argue the Templars reached the New World 2 centuries before Columbus, and while that's definitely in fringe territory, it's the kind of fringe that makes you go, rather than dismissing it entirely. And back in your cell, which is now also your prison, you're being asked questions, and these aren't gentle theological discussions. These are interrogations designed to produce specific answers, and the methods employed by royal inquisitors would make medieval torture museums seem restrained. And here's where we have to acknowledge something uncomfortable. Under torture, people confess to anything, absolutely anything, which means the confessions extracted from Templars are historically unreliable. They admitted to worshipping demons, spitting on the cross, obscene rituals, pretty much whatever their torturers suggested, and modern scholars recognize these confessions as evidence of torture's effectiveness rather than actual Templar practices. But at the time, they served Philip's purpose perfectly, providing legal cover for seizing Templar wealth and destroying an organization that had become inconveniently powerful. And you can imagine the irony as a Templar knight tortured into confessing to heresies you never committed, while the actual controversial knowledge you possess remains safely hidden because your interrogators don't even know the right questions to ask. They're fishing for devil worship when the real secret is buried in historical documents they wouldn't recognize as dangerous even if they saw them. And this must have been both agonizing and grimly satisfying. The pain was real, but at least the truth remained protected. And across France, the same scene plays out in dungeon after dungeon, knights broken on wheels and racks, feet burned, joints dislocated, yet somehow the real secrets stay secret, passed between cells and codes the guards don't notice, preserved in the minds of men who die before revealing what matters. And here's a quirky detail that tells you something about Templar organizational culture. Even under torture, there's no evidence any Templar revealed the location of the main archive. We have confessions to every imaginable crime, but nobody said, oh, by the way, the documents from Jerusalem are hidden under the cathedral in Chartres, or wherever they actually were, which suggests either extraordinary discipline or that the secrets were compartmentalized so thoroughly that most knights genuinely didn't know where everything was hidden. And both explanations are kind of terrifying in different ways. And meanwhile, Pope Clement is issuing bulls and proclamations, officially suppressing the order, transferring their properties to the Hospitallers, though somehow much of that property ends up in royal hands instead, and calling for other European monarchs to arrest Templars in their territories. Though the response is mixed, some countries like England comply somewhat half-heartedly, while others like Portugal basically just rename their Templars and continue business as usual, and Scotland doesn't bother arresting anyone, which is why legends of Templars fleeing to Scotland have such persistence, and the whole situation reveals the messy reality of medieval politics, where papal authority works only when backed by temporal power, and religious orders survive only as long as they remain useful to their protectors, and the Templars had forgotten that lesson, or perhaps chosen to ignore it, believing their wealth and secrets made them untouchable, which proved spectacularly wrong. And by 1314, the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, is being burned at the stake in Paris, and legend says he cursed Philip and Clement from the flames, prophesying they'd join him before God within the year. And whether that's historical fact or dramatic embellishment, both men did die within months, which people at the time found either satisfying evidence of divine justice or terrifying proof that Templars could curse from beyond the grave. And in the scholarly debate about whether de Molay's famous curse was contemporary or invented later by chroniclers, who noticed the convenient timing, the consensus leans toward later invention, but can't prove it definitively. And honestly, the truth of the curse matters less than what it reveals about how people viewed the Templars, as men who possessed knowledge dangerous enough to challenge kings and popes, and you're drifting now between that medieval horror and your comfortable present. And I should probably mention that while this section is deliberately darker than the previous ones, we're acknowledging historical brutality rather than dwelling in it, because what matters for our purposes isn't the torture's details but what it failed to accomplish, the secrets it failed to extract. And as you settle deeper into sleep, consider that somewhere possibly in the Vatican's secret archives, now politely renamed the Apostolic Archives, though the contents remain equally restricted, or in some forgotten chamber beneath a European cathedral, or distributed across a dozen hiding places from Portugal to Poland, the documents the Templars died protecting might still exist, waiting for someone to ask the right questions, to notice the architectural symbol that's actually a map, to realize that certain medieval building projects were covers for creating secure storage, and whether the Church knows exactly where these materials are and guards them actively, or whether they were lost in the chaos and now even Rome isn't sure what survived. And as that question hangs in the darkness, we transition toward understanding why, 7 centuries later, the Vatican still considers this entire topic sensitive enough to restrict access to documents that by any reasonable standard should be open to historians, because the past is never really past when it threatens the present, and the Templars' secrets, whatever they were, apparently still have power to disturb. You're walking through the Vatican Apostolic Archive now. Though of course you're not. Nobody just walks through these chambers. Access is restricted, supervised, limited to credentialed scholars researching approved topics, and even they can't request documents by browsing. They must know exactly what they want, and demonstrate legitimate scholarly need, and certain collections remain completely off-limits regardless of credentials, sealed by orders that predate living memory and show no signs of changing. And here's a documented fact that raises eyebrows. The Vatican Archive contains approximately 53 miles of shelving, holding documents spanning 12 centuries, and while much has been cataloged and some has been digitized, significant portions remain unprocessed, meaning even the archivists don't fully know what they have, which creates the fascinating possibility that explosive revelations could be sitting in boxes labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence 14th Century, waiting for someone to stumble across them, except nobody stumbles in the Vatican Archive, because stumbling isn't permitted, and the sections dealing with the Templar suppression, the trial records, the correspondence between Clement V and Philip IV, these are particularly sensitive, with access granted only rarely, and under conditions that make meaningful research difficult, and you have to wonder why, if the trial was straightforward, and the Templars genuinely guilty of the charges, why restrict access to evidence that would prove the Church's case, unless of course the evidence proves something else entirely, or raises questions nobody wants asked. And scholars who have gained access report finding documents that are cataloged but heavily redacted, pages sewn shut, portions rendered illegible by what might be water damage or might be deliberate obliteration. And here's where conspiracy theories start to merge with legitimate historical questions, because when an institution restricts access to records for 7 centuries, claiming sensitivity or privacy concerns, you have to ask what they're protecting and why. And the official explanation is that the documents contain confessions obtained under torture and therefore violate the dignity of the accused, which is touching concern for men who died in 1314, though it does raise the question of why records of other medieval trials, including equally brutal ones, remain accessible, and the scholarly debate about whether the Vatican is hiding specific evidence or just maintaining bureaucratic inertia and tradition has no clear answer, because the Church doesn't have to justify its archival policies to anyone, and meanwhile researchers keep finding tantalizing hints in documents that are available, references to materials that should exist but can't be located, mentions of secret correspondence that never appears in any catalog, and footnotes that cite sources other historians can't verify. Here's a wonderfully strange detail. Several medieval chronicles reference a Templar confession that differs significantly from the trial records, describing not devil worship but rather the discovery of documents in Jerusalem that called into question the succession of Peter, which, if you're not up on your church politics, means challenging the basis of papal authority itself. And this alternative confession appears in texts from different countries and different decades, suggesting it circulated widely at some point, yet no complete copy survives in any official archive, which is either the worst preservation luck in history or evidence of systematic suppression. And personally, I'd bet on suppression, because the medieval church was very good at making inconvenient documents disappear. They had centuries of practice, and the question of what the Templars actually found beneath Solomon's temple remains tantalizing, precisely because we have fragments but never the complete picture, like trying to reconstruct a painting from scattered brushstrokes. and various theories have been proposed. Some serious scholars suggest the Templars found evidence of early Jewish Christian sects that viewed Jesus as a prophet rather than divine, documents that predated the Council of Nicaea and showed how much Christian doctrine was constructed rather than revealed, while others propose they discovered proof that the crucifixion narrative was embellished, or that resurrection accounts were later additions. And these aren't fringe theories from conspiracy websites. These are published by actual historians in peer-reviewed journals, though always hedged with appropriate scholarly caution, because claiming the Templars found proof that foundational Christian beliefs are historically questionable is a career-limiting move, even in secular academia, and you can imagine the terror this must have induced in medieval church authorities, because Christianity in 1300 wasn't a personal spiritual choice, it was the entire framework of society, law, morality, political legitimacy, everything, and evidence suggesting that framework was built on shaky ground wouldn't lead to thoughtful theological debate, it would lead to civilizational collapse, and so the church did what institutions do when facing existential threats. It eliminated the threat through whatever means necessary, and if that meant torturing and executing its own military champions, destroying an organization that had served faithfully for 2 centuries, and sealing away evidence for the next 7 centuries, well, apparently that was acceptable collateral damage. And here's where it gets darkly humorous in that way medieval politics often does. Philip IV seized Templar wealth claiming divine purpose, then died mysteriously less than a year later, and his sons died young and without male heirs, ending the direct Capetian line, and people at the time absolutely believed this was the Templar curse manifesting, divine punishment for destroying God's warriors, though modern historians note that the Capetian line was already weakening, genetically, and the deaths might just be medieval medicine, but the symbolic justice was too perfect for contemporaries to ignore, and legends grew of Templars who escaped and continued their order in secret, passing down knowledge through underground networks, influencing events from the shadows, and while most serious historians dismiss this as romantic fantasy, there are odd coincidences, architectural symbols appearing in unexpected places, financial innovations that seem to echo Templar banking practices, and occasional documentary references that suggest some survivors did maintain connections, though probably not the globe-spanning conspiracy that popular culture imagines, more likely small groups preserving fragments of knowledge and hoping for future vindication. And whether those groups still exist, whether somewhere there's an unbroken line of initiation stretching from 1314 to today, is the kind of question that generates more speculation than evidence, though it's worth noting that when the Catholic Church finally released some Templar trial documents in 2007, carefully selected and heavily contextualized, the Vatican still found it necessary to include disclaimers about proper interpretation and historical context, which suggests somebody in Rome still considers this topic sensitive, and you drift now through imagined archives, past documents you'll never read, containing truths you'll never know with certainty, and perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps some mysteries should remain mysterious, not because truth isn't valuable, but because the search for truth, the question itself, enriches us more than any answer could, and the Templars, whatever they found, whatever they knew, became vessels for humanity's hope that there are secrets worth dying for, knowledge worth protecting, truths that transcend temporal power and institutional control, and whether the Vatican guards Templar documents because they're genuinely dangerous, or simply because institutions hate admitting uncertainty and prefer maintaining mystery to risking revelation, the effect is the same. We're left with fragments, hints, enough evidence to fuel imagination, but never enough to satisfy certainty, and maybe that's the real secret, not whatever scrolls the Templars carried from Jerusalem, but the enduring power of unknown knowledge to captivate human consciousness, to remind us that history is never fully written, that beneath the official narrative lie layers of complexity and contradiction, and stories that powerful institutions would prefer remain buried. And as you sink deeper into sleep, the stone corridors of the Vatican archive merge with the underground chambers of Jerusalem, and the 9 knights who started this whole mystery are still there in the darkness, still digging, still discovering, still making choices about truth and power, and what's worth preserving regardless of cost, and their torches flicker in the eternal present of dreams where all history happens simultaneously, and the forbidden knowledge they found is both real and metaphor, both specific documents and the larger truth that institutions fear authentic inquiry, that power structures depend on controlling narratives, and that somewhere, always, there are people willing to risk everything to preserve uncomfortable truths, and maybe you're one of them, or maybe you just appreciate knowing that such people existed, that the Templars, whatever their faults, chose knowledge over comfort and secrecy over safety, and paid the ultimate price, and whether their sacrifice protected something valuable or merely delayed inevitable revelation is something we can debate as we transition now from narrative into reflection, from story into meaning, from the specific history of warrior monks and papal politics into the larger questions of how we understand power and truth and the relationship between them, and what it means that 7 centuries later we're still asking these questions, still wondering what lies in those sealed sections of the archive, still hoping that someday someone will find the courage to simply open the boxes and let the truth emerge regardless of consequences, though whether such courage exists in institutions designed to maintain continuity and control remains very much an open question. So here we are, suspended between history and legend, between documented fact and tantalizing possibility, and it's worth pausing now to consider what this story really tells us, not just about the Templars or the Vatican, but about how power and knowledge interact, how institutions preserve themselves, and why certain questions remain dangerous centuries after the people who first asked them have turned to dust. The Knights Templar emerged from a specific historical moment when Europe was discovering that the world was larger and more complex than church doctrine suggested, when contact with Islamic scholarship was revealing that Christian civilization didn't have a monopoly on wisdom, when ancient texts in Arabic and Greek were challenging assumptions Europeans had held for centuries, and into this intellectual ferment came these 9 knights who descended into chambers beneath Jerusalem and emerged changed, carrying knowledge that complicated the simple narratives their society depended on. The historical significance of the Templars extends far beyond whatever they found in those underground rooms, because they represented something genuinely new, a military order that operated across national boundaries, that developed sophisticated financial systems predating modern banking, that maintained loyalty to an ideal rather than to any particular king or territory, and that accumulated enough power to threaten the very church that created them. You can trace lines from Templar organizational innovations to modern multinational corporations, from their banking practices to contemporary finance, from their encrypted communications to modern intelligence agencies. And while I'm not suggesting direct descent, there's something instructive in how the Templars solved problems of coordination, secrecy, and trust across vast distances using medieval technology. The mystery of what they discovered beneath Solomon's temple matters less than what that mystery represents. The enduring human hope that somewhere there's hidden knowledge, preserved truths that powerful institutions fear, evidence that official narratives aren't complete, and this hope persists because it's often justified, because we keep discovering that institutions do hide uncomfortable facts, that official histories do omit inconvenient details, that power structures do fear authentic inquiry into their foundations. The scholarly debates about the Templars remain unresolved not because historians are incompetent, but because the evidence was deliberately obscured, documents were destroyed or sealed, and the victors wrote history with particular care to ensure their version prevailed. And this should remind us that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, that when we can't find documentation for something, it might mean it didn't happen, or it might mean someone worked very hard to ensure we wouldn't find documentation. The Vatican's continued restriction of Templar-related archives, 7 centuries after the order's suppression, should strike us as remarkable, not necessarily because it proves conspiracy, but because it reveals institutional memory and institutional priorities, the long view that churches and governments take when protecting narratives they consider essential to their legitimacy. Think about the layers we've moved through tonight. The 9 nights in darkness, torches flickering against ancient stone, fingers tracing Hebrew inscriptions carved when Jerusalem was young, the weight of discovering something unexpected, something that doesn't fit the story you've been told, and the choice they faced about what to do with that knowledge, whether to reveal it immediately and face consequences, or to preserve it carefully and build structures to protect it. And they chose the latter, spending decades creating an organization specifically designed to guard dangerous truths while maintaining enough orthodox respectability to survive. And it worked for almost 2 centuries until it didn't, until Philip decided wealth mattered more than secrets, and Clement decided political alliance mattered more than protecting knowledge. And then came the arrests and torture and burnings, but the secrets survived, hidden so well that even the interrogators never found them, compartmentalized so thoroughly that knights died without revealing locations, and somewhere those documents might still exist, waiting in darkness as they've waited for 700 years. The Templars' lasting impact isn't in whatever scrolls they carried from Jerusalem, it's in the questions they force us to ask about authority and truth, about institutional power and individual conscience, about what's worth dying for and what secrets are worth keeping. And these questions remain relevant because the dynamics they illuminate remain current. We still live in a world where institutions control narratives, where uncomfortable facts get classified or buried, where asking the wrong questions can cost careers if not lives, though we've generally moved past burning people at the stake, which I suppose counts as progress. The sensory details we've accumulated through this journey, the taste of dust in underground chambers, the flicker of torchlight on ancient inscriptions, the weight of sealed documents, the echo of boots in stone corridors, the smoke rising from pyres in Paris, the climate-controlled silence of modern archives, these aren't just atmospheric flourishes, they're anchors helping us understand that history happened to real people in real places, that the Templars weren't abstract symbols, but men who breathed air and felt fear and made choices under impossible pressure. And remembering their humanity helps us take seriously the questions their story raises. We've touched on mainstream facts, the documented 9 years of excavation, the 53 miles of Vatican shelving, the coordinated arrests across France, and these facts provide scaffolding, the solid ground from which we explore less certain territory. We've acknowledged quirky details, the encrypted Templar communications, the bones of the son of Solomon, the ships that vanished from La Rochelle, and these details remind us that history is stranger than simplified narratives suggest, full of odd specificities that don't fit neat categories, and we've engaged with scholarly debates, whether the Templars intended eventual disclosure or permanent secrecy, whether Clement was willing participant or weak pope bullied by a strong king, whether the Jerusalem discoveries were religious artifacts or historical documents or something else entirely, and these debates remind us that uncertainty is honest, that admitting we don't know is more rigorous than pretending to knowledge we don't possess, and that the questions often matter more than answers, because questions keep inquiry alive, while answers can close it down. As you drift here in the space between waking and sleep, between history and imagination, between the documented past and the possible truth, consider what it means that this story still has power, that the Templars still fascinate us, that the Vatican still guards these particular archives, and what all of this suggests about the relationship between knowledge and power, truth and institution, the individual conscience and the collective narrative, and whether you personally believe the Templars found something world-shaking or simply became convenient scapegoats for a greedy king. Their story illuminates dynamics that remain essential to understanding how societies function, how truth gets constructed and deconstructed, how some questions remain dangerous long after everyone involved has died, and as we prepare to transition into our final section, into the gentle goodnight that will carry you from this forbidden history into peaceful dreams, take with you the image of those 9 nights in the darkness, still digging, still discovering, still facing the eternal choice between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths, and know that their struggle continues in every person who questions official narratives, who seeks evidence behind authority, who refuses to accept that some knowledge should remain permanently forbidden, and that struggle, more than any specific document or artifact, is the real secret the Templars left us, the inheritance that no church can seal in archives, and no king can destroy with fire. And so we come to the end of tonight's journey, though really there's no end to this story, only a pause, a moment to rest before the questions resume. And that's fitting, because history never stops. It keeps unfolding, keeps revealing new facets, keeps challenging what we thought we knew. And the Templars, those 9 knights who descended into darkness and emerged with secrets, they're still there in the underground chambers of our collective imagination, still digging, still discovering, and you can let them continue their work while you release the need to know, while you settle into the not knowing that sleep requires, because sleep is fundamentally an act of trust, trusting that the questions will wait until morning, that the mysteries will still be there when you wake, and they will be. The Vatican archive will still guard its secrets tomorrow, the debates will continue in academic journals, and treasure hunters will still be searching for those 18 ships that vanished from La Rochelle carrying who knows what to who knows where, and all of this can wait while you rest. Think about the candlelight we've carried through this narrative, how it flickered in underground chambers, how it illuminated ancient inscriptions for the first time in centuries, how it cast shadows that danced across stone walls, while knights made decisions that would echo through the ages, and let that candlelight dim now. Let the flame grow smaller and steadier, a single point of warmth in gathering darkness, and let your breathing slow to match its gentle flicker. In and out, steady as a flame that's burning down but hasn't yet gone out. And there's something peaceful about a candle's ending, the way it doesn't fight but simply completes itself, burns through the wax it was given, and accepts when that wax is gone. And you can accept too. Accept that some questions won't be answered tonight, that forbidden histories will remain forbidden for now, that the Vatican will keep its secrets at least until morning, and that this is fine, more than fine, because the not knowing creates a space where rest can happen, where imagination can wander without needing to reach conclusions, where you can simply be curious without being urgent about that curiosity. If you've enjoyed this journey through corridors of stone and corridors of time, through the documented past and the speculative possible, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Not because I need the numbers though, of course creators always appreciate support, but because subscribing means you'll find more of these bedtime histories waiting for you. More stories that blend fact and mystery. More questions that don't demand immediate answers. More gentle explorations of the strange and fascinating corners of human experience. And there's something lovely about building a community of people who fall asleep together, scattered across time zones and continents but gathered here in shared darkness, all of us wondering about the same forbidden knowledge, all of us drifting on the same currents of historical mystery. And if you hit the like button, it helps other people find these videos, helps the algorithm understand that there's an audience for thoughtful, slow-paced, sleep-inducing investigations of topics that mainstream documentaries rush through. And maybe leave a comment telling me what forbidden history you'd like to explore next, what mysteries you think deserve this treatment, what questions keep you awake, that I might help you release into the gentle space of not needing to know right now. And whether you subscribe or not, whether you like or not, I'm grateful you spent this time here, that you trusted me to guide you through this particular story, and I hope I've earned that trust by being honest about uncertainty, by acknowledging what we know and what we don't, by respecting both history and your intelligence enough to present complexity rather than simple answers. Picture yourself now in a quiet chamber, not the stone dungeons where Templars were tortured, and not the underground rooms where they discovered their secrets, but a comfortable space, warm and safe, where all the questions we've raised tonight are present but not pressing, where you can think about 9 nights in Jerusalem without needing to solve their mystery, where you can wonder about sealed archives without anxiety about access, where the whole forbidden history we've explored becomes like a distant melody, still audible but growing softer, still there but no longer demanding attention. And your breathing has probably slowed by now. Your body has probably found that heaviness that precedes sleep, that sense of sinking into the mattress as if the bed was welcoming you deeper, accepting your weight. And you can accept too, accept the day's ending, accept that consciousness is optional, that you don't need to maintain vigilance, that sleep is not surrender but trust, trusting that you'll wake again, that the world will continue without your observation, that the mysteries will wait. The Templars understood secrets. They built their entire organization around preserving knowledge that couldn't be openly shared, and in a way you're doing the same thing now, preserving in the quiet chambers of your mind the story we've told tonight, not worrying about whether you'll remember every detail in the morning, just letting it settle into whatever part of consciousness holds the things we know without actively thinking about them. And maybe in dreams you'll walk through the Vatican archive, running your fingers along spines of books you're not allowed to read. Or maybe you'll stand in Jerusalem watching 9 men with torches descend into darkness. Or maybe you'll dream of something entirely different, because dreams have their own logic and their own mysteries, and that's beautiful. That surrender to the unconscious processes that sort and file and make sense of experience in ways waking thought cannot achieve. The stone corridors we've walked tonight, whether in Rome or Jerusalem or the chapter houses of medieval France, they're settling into stillness now, the torches burning down, the footsteps fading, the voices of long-dead nights receding into the silence they've occupied for 7 centuries. And you can recede too, can let your thoughts grow quieter, can release the need to follow every thread we've unraveled, can trust that the important things will remain, will be there in the morning if you need them, and the rest can dissolve into that pleasant fog that precedes sleep, the state where thoughts don't quite connect in linear ways, where time becomes fluid, and you're not sure if you've been lying here for minutes or hours, and it doesn't matter. Time is one more thing you can release, one more structure you don't need to maintain right now, and as you release it, as you let go of the need to know what time it is, or how long you've been drifting, you'll find that sleep comes easier, that consciousness requires effort, and you can simply stop making that effort, can let awareness fade like candlelight, flickering lower and lower, until there's just darkness, warm and encompassing and safe, the darkness that held secrets for the Templars, that holds the Vatican's archives still, and that will hold you now gently as you release the forbidden histories we've explored, and accept the mystery of your own consciousness winding down, preparing for the small death and rebirth that is sleep and waking. And I'll be here when you need another story, another journey through the strange and fascinating past. Another gentle exploration of questions that don't require urgent answers. And until then, rest well, dream deeply, and know that some secrets are worth keeping, including the secret of what you'll discover in the country of sleep, that territory we visit every night but can never quite remember. And maybe that's the ultimate forbidden knowledge, the nightly journey we all take, but cannot bring back intact. And maybe that's fine, maybe perfect, maybe exactly as it should be. End of script. Sweet dreams.